I still couldn't see who he was yelling about since I was too far behind. But just knowing that the man was still there made my blood boil, and I pushed myself to run faster. Hal shouted, "He's in the cave," right as he broke through the tree line. I figured he would stop at the entrance and keep watch until the police arrived. But instead, Hal charged straight inside after him. I yelled for him to wait, but he didn't, and I suppose, in a way, he wasn't entirely wrong not to. We later learned that the cave ended in a dead end, and the man was actually running out of space. But at the time, all I could think was that Hal was insane for rushing into near total darkness with nothing except the flashlight on his phone to guide him. I stayed at the cave entrance, shouting for Hal to come back since it seemed like we had the guy trapped. But he didn't return. Nearly a full minute passed before I realized I might have no choice but to go in after him. But just as I stepped forward, Hal emerged from the darkness. He looked pale and shaken. I asked what had happened, and he only said the man had gotten away. But instead of stopping to talk, he walked right past me and started heading toward the trees again. As I followed and asked if he at least managed to see the guy's face, I noticed Hal was trembling. Then he suddenly stopped and put both hands on top of his. Had the kind of posture people take when they're trying to process something shocking or heartbreaking. Seeing that expression and that stunned look in his eyes told me half the story already. He looked at me in a way that reminded me of a much younger version of himself, almost smaller somehow. Then he finally said, "I had him. I had him, and I let him go." It was like he was struggling to even form the explanation. Like he didn't know how to put what happened into words. After I told him to just say it, he finally did. Hal said he ran straight to the back of the cave, turned on his phone light, and saw the man disappearing into a side passage. The guy was fast, but Hal was faster. Within seconds, he'd closed the distance and caught up with him. When Hal got within arm's reach, he grabbed for the man with one hand. But the guy twisted round, tore free of Hal's grip, and hissed at him. Hal said he hissed like some kind of wild animal cat. Almost, and then swiped at him with nails so long and yellow they looked like claws. The guy bared his teeth when he hissed too, and Hal said they were so dark and rotten that it was a miracle they hadn't all fallen out already. The man was clearly out of his mind. He had to be. No one who was remotely sane would wander around those tunnels looking like they hadn't bathed in over a year. But what chilled us both to the core was realizing that despite how far gone he looked, he still had enough twisted awareness to try dragging a child back into the darkness with him. I completely understood why Hal was so shaken. By the time we made it back to camp, my wife had already called 911, and a ranger was on the way to talk to us. When he arrived, he explained that searching all the caves was almost pointless. There were too many entrances and exits scattered across the park, and if the man knew the system well, he could have slipped out almost anywhere. He tried to reassure us only a little by insisting that it was impossible for someone to actually live inside the cave network without park officials knowing. He said they'd keep an eye out for anyone matching the description, and that if they spotted him, he'd be arrested immediately and we would be notified. As you can imagine. The kids absolutely refused to stay another night in the park, so we had no choice but to pack up and bring the trip to an early end. Now that I think about it, Hal and I were probably the only ones who didn't want to leave, and not because we hadn't enjoyed the trip. It was more like both of us wanted nothing more than to hunt down the creep who had tried to grab our kids, but we were just two exhausted dads. If the rangers already knew that sealing off the entire cave system wouldn't make a difference, then what chance did we have? The frustration was intense. But it faded quickly. What didn't fade was the sickening realization that no matter how safe you think you are, there's no perfect way to shield your children from people who want to hurt them. Hal went down a deep rabbit hole afterward, trying to find any stories or reports about someone else encountering the same deranged cave dweller. He didn't find anything. But I know he still thinks about that man from time to time. He regrets being startled into letting him go and wishes he'd given him the beating he deserved when he had the chance. And honestly, I can't blame him. I'd pay a whole lot of money for 5 minutes alone in a windowless room with that disgusting excuse for a human being. A long time ago, my friend Joe and I went on a small camping trip out in the Cascades. Joe was easily one of the funniest human beings I've ever known. Honestly, he was so naturally hilarious that he could have easily hosted his own talk show. I used to tell him all the time that he should try stand-up comedy, but he always insisted he was far too shy. According to him, he could only be funny around people he felt comfortable with. Up in Washington, it's rare to get a weekend without rain, even during the height of summer. So when we found out there would be 3 full days in October with less than a 20% chance of rain, we knew we had the perfect opportunity for a camping trip. At least one where we wouldn't end up soaked and miserable like a couple of drowned rats. Joe picked me up that Friday afternoon after we both left work early. A few hours later, we were roasting hot dogs and cracking open beers round our campfire. Camping trips with Joe always went by too fast. 1 minute you were setting up your tent, and the next, you were packing it back up after laughing non-stop for 2 or 3 straight days. That trip was no different. Sure, all the beer probably helped blur things together, but it genuinely felt like the whole weekend vanished in an instant. By the time we were loading up the car to leave, we'd already gone through most of our snacks and a ridiculous amount of beer. We had everything packed and were literally about to head home when Joe suddenly said, "Hang on, I need to use the bathroom." I told him it was fine, but asked him to be quick because I was starving. Then he clarified, "Not that kind of bathroom break. It's gonna take a while." I remember rolling my eyes and silently cursing the timing, but Joe just grinned and said, "Hey, when nature calls," before hopping out of the passenger seat. He walked to the back of the car, dug through our gear until he found toilet paper, and headed into the trees to do his business. I kept an old World War II book in the side compartment of my driver's door. So while Joe was off relieving himself, I figured I could read a page or two. I ended up getting way too caught up in this graphic section describing German paratroopers getting stuck in trees and locals stabbing them with pitchforks when their parachutes snagged. So when Joe came sprinting back to the car, yelling, "Start the damn car," he scared the life out of me. I didn't ask a single question. I trusted Joe completely, so I slammed my foot on the gas without hesitation. Only after we were moving did I ask what happened, but I didn't really need the explanation. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, I saw a man with a bandana covering his face break out of the trees and start running after us, even though I couldn't clearly see what he was holding. It looked like some kind of long-handled tool or weapon, maybe an axe or a pole, naturally. I shifted up and floored it because the guy was sprinting at full speed.